Story 1, Atlantis, Atlantic Basin. The record begins with a city that was never supposed to exist. Around 360 BC, the Greek philosopher Plato described an advanced civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules. He did not present it as metaphor. He gave measurements, timelines, political structure, a naval power with concentric harbors, engineered canals, and stone architecture on a scale unmatched for its time. He named it Atlantis and said it vanished in a single day and night of flooding. Most historians stopped there, but the discovery did not end with Plato. It started with him. The measurements were precise. The geography was specific. The destruction was sudden. In the modern era, oceanographic surveys of the Atlantic revealed anomalies that refused to stay buried. Sunken plateaus. Rectilinear formation. Submerged terraces at depths consistent with post-Ice Age sea rise. One structure in particular, the Richat Formation in Mauritania, matches Plato's concentric description with unsettling accuracy when viewed from above. Not proof, but not coincidence either. Then the data complicated matters. Bathymetric scans revealed flat surfaces and sharp elevation changes inconsistent with random geology. Core samples taken from nearby seabed showed signs of rapid inundation. High-energy sediment layers deposited all at once, not gradually. In several locations, these layers date to the same broad window associated with massive meltwater pulses at the end of the last ice age. The sediment arrived violently. The sea rose fast. The timing matched. Who recorded this? Not philosophers. Scientists. Naval survey teams. Petroleum exploration vessels mapping the ocean floor for commercial reasons. Not myth. Their raw data exists. What's missing are the conclusions. Because intervention followed. Atlantis was formally reclassified, not disproven, but neutralized. Academic consensus reframed it as allegory. Funding bodies refused to support research tied to the name. Papers proposing geological correlations were rejected for methodological speculation. No excavation permits were ever granted for targeted underwater investigation tied directly to the claim. This is suppression by designation. Once labeled myth, a subject no longer requires rebuttal. It requires silence. The consequence was not just academic. It was personal. One marine geologist who pushed for deeper Atlantic coring tied to Plato's coordinates lost his institutional backing. His project dissolved. He never returned to field research. He missed his daughter's graduation while fighting the appeal process that went nowhere. Atlantis did not need to be erased. It only needed to be ridiculed. And yet, it lingers. Not as a lost island, but as a signal. A warning that advanced societies may have existed on coastlines now drowned. That when the flood came, it did not spare knowledge. It buried it. Plato said Atlantis fell before history began. The ocean suggests he was late. Myth classification formalized. No permits issued since 1958. Story 2, Dwarka, India. The second civilization was not a rumor. It was measured off the western coast of India, beneath the Arabian Sea. Sonar surveys conducted in the late 20th century detected something unexpected, rectilinear patterns on the seafloor. Grids, right angles, long walls aligned with no known natural process. The location matched Dvarka, an ancient city described in early Indian texts as having been swallowed by the sea. Unlike Atlantis, this one came with coordinates. The city was mapped. The walls were aligned. The sea shouldn't be there. Marine archaeologists began systematic surveys. What they found complicated the timeline. Stone blocks arranged in courses. Anchors carved from single pieces of rock. Road-like features extending beyond the visible perimeter. These were not scattered remains. They were components of urban planning. The depth mattered. Dvarka sits more than 30 feet below current sea level. That alone places its submergence after the last ice age, when global sea levels rose rapidly. Core samples taken near the structures revealed abrupt marine intrusion, salt water flooding land that had once been dry. Not erosion over centuries. A sudden claim by the ocean. The sea advanced fast. The land did not adapt. The layer was clean. Who recorded this evidence? Government-backed institutions. India's National Institute of Oceanography logged sonar data, photographs, and sediment cores. One internal designation stood out. Layer D2, a high-energy deposit directly overlying worked stone. It indicated a violent inundation event, not gradual submersion. That designation would matter later. Then the narrative shifted. Rather than framing Dvarka as a pre-flood urban center, the site was absorbed into religious context. The city became symbolic, sacred, untouchable, once wrapped in belief. Historical inquiry slowed. Excavations were limited. Interpretations softened. The flood became metaphor, not mechanism. This was not denial. It was deflection. Research papers emphasized anchors and trade, never the grid. The sonar maps were published without overlays. Layer D, 2 was mentioned, then quietly excluded from summaries. No follow-up drilling was authorized at the most anomalous points. The consequence fell on individuals. One junior survey engineer who attempted to independently reprocess the sonar returns was removed from the project after submitting an internal memo questioning the official interpretation. His contract was not renewed. He returned to commercial surveying. He never worked in archaeology again. He sold his equipment to pay medical bills after a diving accident that ended his field career. Dvarka remained, half acknowledged, half sealed. But the data did not disappear. Layer D, 2 sat in the archive. Logged. Time-stamped. Unresolved. A marker of sudden flooding over engineered stone. A signature that would later surface again, far from India, under a different sea, with the same geometry. Dvarka was not an isolated legend. It was a data point, and it was waiting to be matched. Sonar Layer D, 2 logged, archive without cross-site comparison. 2001. Story 3, Gunung Padang, Indonesia. The third civilization was hidden in plain sight. For generations, Gunung Padang was considered a hill, a natural rise in West Java, terraced by locals for ceremonial use. No controversy, no mystery, until geological surveys suggested the terraces were not surface features, but the exposed crown of something far older and far larger beneath. Excavation began cautiously. What emerged challenged the foundation of Southeast Asian prehistory. The hill was artificial. The layers were stacked. The dates went backward. Core samples drilled deep into the structure revealed columnar stone arranged deliberately, not deposited naturally. Beneath the visible terraces were multiple construction layers, each older than the one above it. This alone defied expectation. Civilizations are supposed to build upward over time, not bury advanced work beneath simpler phases. Then came the dates. Radiocarbon testing of organic material trapped between stone layers produced results that stunned the research team. Some samples dated beyond 10,000 BC. Others pushed earlier still, into periods officially assigned to hunter-gatherer societies with no known megalithic capability. The implication was not subtle. Someone had organized labor. Someone had engineered stone. Someone had done it before agriculture was supposed to exist. The timeline broke. The tools were missing. The structure remained. Who recorded this? A joint Indonesian research team using seismic tomography, ground-penetrating radar, and coring technology typically reserved for oil exploration. The methods were standard. The anomaly was a result. The deeper scan suggested a massive, tiered structure extending tens of meters below the surface, far larger than the visible site. Not a shrine, not a mound, a buried complex. Then the pressure arrived. International criticism followed fast. The dates were labeled contaminated. The interpretation was called speculative. Funding partners withdrew. Excavation permits were suspended pending further review. The review never concluded. Data access tightened. Core samples were sealed. Raw seismic files were restricted. Team members were instructed not to speak publicly without authorization. The project was reframed as exploratory, not historical. The deeper layers, where the oldest dates clustered, were left untouched. This was not a raid. It was a freeze. The consequence was immediate and human. The lead geologist, who had publicly defended the early dates, was removed as project coordinator. His academic standing deteriorated. Invitations stopped. He missed his daughter's graduation while attending a closed-door disciplinary hearing that ended his role in the dig. The site continued without him, stripped of its most controversial questions. Gunung Padang was reclassified as a ceremonial landscape. The buried structure was declared unproven. The dates were labeled unreliable. But the stone did not move. It remained where it had always been, beneath layers of soil, beneath layers of narrative. A constructed mass older than accepted civilization, sealed under the claim that it was simply too early to be real. The flood connection lingered quietly. Several cores showed abrupt sediment infill consistent with water-driven deposition between construction phases. Not erosion. Inundation. A pause. Then rebuilding. As if the site had survived a catastrophic event and been reused afterward by people who no longer fully understood it. Gunung Padang did not disappear beneath water like Dwarka. It disappeared beneath certainty. And with it, the idea that civilization has only risen once. Excavation halted. Deep layer carbon dates sealed from review. 2014. Story for Yanaguni, Japan. The fourth site should not exist at all. In 1986, a local diver off the coast of Yanaguni Island descended expecting reformations. What he found instead were steps. Massive ones. Sharp-edged terraces descending in clean lines, cut into solid stone beneath 30 meters of water. Not rubble. Not collapse. Geometry. The angles were wrong. The steps were deliberate. Nature doesn't draft plans. Further surveys revealed a complex stretching hundreds of feet, flat platforms, straight corridors, apparent staircases, and vertical faces meeting at near-perfect right angles. Some surfaces showed parallel striations consistent with tool marks. Others aligned with cardinal directions, an odd coincidence for a natural formation. The depth mattered again. Yonaguni sits far below the reach of historical sea levels. To submerge it naturally, the ocean must have risen dramatically after the structure was exposed. That places its construction window before the end of the last ice age, when sea levels were lower by more than 100 meters. The sea rose later. The stone was earlier. The math conflicted. Who recorded this? Marine geologists, structural engineers, divers with no interest in myth. Photogrammetry mapped the site in detail. Measurements were repeatable. Angles were consistent. The structure behaved like architecture under analysis, not erosion under imagination. Then came the ruling. Official assessments declare Yonaguni a natural formation shaped by tectonic fracturing and wave action. Case closed. No excavation. No coring. No testing beneath the surfaces. The decision leaned heavily on the idea that nature can sometimes imitate design without addressing why it would do so at this scale, with this regularity. Dissenting voices were tolerated, then sidelined. Requests for deeper investigation were denied on environmental grounds. Research grants evaporated. The term monument was quietly replaced with formation in all formal documentation. Once redefined, the site no longer threatened the timeline. This was suppression by semantics. The consequence landed on the person who first mapped it seriously. A senior diver and researcher who spent years documenting Yonaguni geometry lost institutional support after refusing to retract his architectural interpretation. His funding ended. His equipment was repossessed. He returned to commercial diving, leaving behind thousands of photographs that would never be formally analyzed. He never returned to the site. Yonaguni remained underwater, visible but untouched. No flood layer could be sampled because no drilling was allowed. No construction debris could be tested because excavation was prohibited. The question was frozen in place, sealed by classification as geology instead of history. Yet one fact remains uncontested. Yonaguni could not have been shaped at its current depth. Whether built or modified, it existed when the sea was lower, which means it stood before a massive rise in global water levels, before the flood signatures seen elsewhere. Dvarka drowned. Gunung Padang buried itself. Yonaguni waited and was labeled natural. The pattern held. Not denial. Reframing. Natural formation designation issued. Excavation permits denied since 1999. Story 5, Cairo, Peru. The fifth civilization disrupted the timeline without sinking beneath the sea. Cairo sits in the Soup Valley of Peru, inland and dry, far from any ocean. When it was formally identified in the late 20th century, it was immediately recognized as monumental. Pyramidal platforms, sunken plazas, and organized urban planning spread across a vast area. Carbon dating placed it around 2600 BC, older than the pyramids of Egypt. That alone was a problem. No pottery. No metal. A city anyway. Carroll showed no evidence of warfare. No defensive walls. No weapons. Yet it coordinated large-scale construction, labor organization, and precise spatial design. This implied social complexity without the usual markers of early states. Even more troubling, it appeared fully formed, with no visible developmental precursors in the region. Cities do not usually appear like this. Beneath Carroll's foundations, researchers identified compacted sediment layers inconsistent with slow river flooding. These deposits showed signs of rapid water movement, high energy flow carrying mixed material, then stopping abruptly. Above them sat the city. Below them, scattered human activity abruptly ended. The sequence mattered. It suggested that Carroll was built after a major hydrological disruption, not before. A civilization rising on the remains of something earlier, something erased. The flood was not Carroll's end. It was its inheritance. The ground was reset. The builders adapted. The past vanished. Who recorded this? University-led excavations, peer-reviewed studies, and government-sanctioned digs. The data was legitimate, but the emphasis was selective. Publications focus on Carroll as a pristine civilization, independent and isolated. The flood layers were mentioned briefly, then excluded from interpretive models. Here, the skeptic alternative must be stated clearly. Carroll could represent an isolated early development rather than evidence of a lost pre-flood civilization, arising independently after regional environmental change. That argument is reasonable and incomplete because it avoids a discontinuity. There is no gradual transition from earlier local settlements into Carroll's scale and organization. The jump is abrupt, and the flood deposits beneath it align in timing with major climatic instability across the globe, including events associated with rapid meltwater release. Suppression here was subtle. Not denial, but omission. The flood was treated as background noise, not causal force. The possibility that Carroll inherited land reshaped by catastrophe, perhaps informed by older knowledge, was never explored. Funding followed safer questions. Comparative analysis with other flood sites was never pursued. The consequence was human and immediate. During a period of increased attention, looting surged. One site guard was killed while attempting to stop artifact theft from an unprotected sector. The incident was recorded as a criminal matter, not a heritage failure. Excavation slowed. Security tightened. Questions narrowed. Carroll was preserved, but isolated. It became a starting point, not a continuation. A beginning, not a survivor. The deeper past beneath it was sealed under stratigraphy and assumption. Carroll tells a different kind of flood story. Not a city drowned. A city built after forgetting, which raises a sharper question. If Carroll rose from the ruins of something erased, how many other first civilizations are simply the second attempt? Flood strata documented beneath Carroll, excluded from regional synthesis. 2004. Story 6, Doggerland, North Sea. The sixth civilization did not fall into legend. It fell into the sea. Doggerland was once a vast, low-lying landmass connecting what are now Britain, the Netherlands, and Scandinavia. For decades, it was dismissed as a simple hunting ground, a temporary plain crossed by nomadic groups. That assumption collapsed when industrial trawlers began pulling artifacts from the North Sea floor. Not bones. Tools. The nets caught history. The land was occupied. The sea arrived fast. Stone implements, worked wood, and traces of hearth surfaced from depths that should have been empty. Later seismic surveys conducted for oil and gas exploration mapped buried river systems, forest beds, and structured terrain beneath the seabed. This was not a corridor. It was a homeland. Then came the deposits. Sediment analysis revealed a massive tsunami layer spanning large portions of the region. Known as the Storegga Slide, this underwater landslide off the Norwegian coast triggered a wave of extraordinary force around 6,200 BCE. The tsunami did not erode gradually. It overran. In some places, it reached tens of meters inland. The wave crossed everything. No refuge remained. The map was erased. The evidence showed abrupt abandonment. Settlements ended at the same stratigraphic level. Forests were flattened, then submerged. Human activity ceased within what appears to be a single generation. This was not climate drift. It was catastrophe. Who recorded this? Commercial surveyors, marine geologists, and later academic teams piecing together data never intended to reveal civilization. The irony mattered. Doggerland was not discovered by archaeologists looking for it. It was uncovered by industries mapping the seabed for profit. And yet, classification followed. Doggerland was defined as prehistoric landscape, not civilization. The term mattered. Once framed as pre-civilizational, questions of urban organization, social complexity, and knowledge systems were dismissed. No cities were sought because none were expected. The absence became proof. But the scale of habitation contradicts that framing. River networks imply managed resources. Tool density suggests permanent populations. The suddenness of loss implies no time to adapt or migrate infrastructure. Whatever Doggerland was, it was not temporary. The suppression here was linguistic. By refusing the word civilization, the site was stripped of its implications. Funding focused on environmental reconstruction, not human systems. Comparative studies with other flood sites were never prioritized. The consequence was absolute. Doggerland's people did not survive to tell their story. No texts, no monuments above water. Their culture ended beneath a wall of water that left no witnesses. An entire world disappeared without myth to preserve it. One recovered skull, dredged up by a fishing vessel, showed healed injuries, evidence of a life lived, not merely passed through. It now sits in a museum drawer, labeled by location, not by name. Whoever he was, his homeland is gone. Doggerland is not a legend because no one remained to remember it, which may be the most dangerous kind of erasure, because it leaves no stories, only sediment. From this point on, The pattern stops asking permission. Starega tsunami confirmed. Civilization classification formally excluded. 2007. Story 7. The Piari Dynastic Nile Complex, Egypt. The seventh civilization sits beneath one of the most studied landscapes on Earth. Egypt is supposed to begin around 3100 BCE, with the unification of Upper and Lower Kingdoms. That is where the textbooks open. But beneath dynastic Egypt, beneath its temples, causeways, and pyramids, there are foundations that do not fit the sequence. Older stone, different erosion, earlier intent. The base is wrong. The stone is older. The water came first. At several major Nile sites, including the Giza Plateau, geologists identified erosion patterns inconsistent with desert conditions. The lower courses of massive stone blocks show rounded edges, deep vertical channels, and smoothing that matches prolonged exposure to heavy rainfall, not wind or sand. Egypt has not had sustained rainfall of that magnitude since the end of the last ice age. The implication is direct. Those stones were in place before the climate changed. Seismic surveys beneath the plateau revealed subsurface cavities and buried features suggesting earlier construction phases. Not tombs, not natural voids, structured spaces. In some locations, dynastic monuments appear to sit on top of foundations that were already ancient when the first pharaohs arrived. The builders reused. The knowledge survived. The origin was lost. Who recorded this? Independent geologists, seismic engineers, and a small number of Egyptologists willing to cross disciplinary lines. Their findings were published cautiously, often outside mainstream archaeological journals. The data itself was rarely challenged. The interpretation was, because excavation has limits. Areas surrounding key monuments are among the most restricted archaeological zones in the world. Drilling is prohibited. Deep coring is denied. Subsurface investigation is allowed only under tightly controlled conditions. What lies beneath is not denied. It is simply unreachable. This is suppression by perimeter. Official narratives frame dynastic Egypt as a sudden flowering of complexity, guided by divine kingship. The possibility that pharaohs inherited structures, techniques, or spatial knowledge from a pre-flood culture disrupts that image. So the question is left unasked. The consequence has been quietly human. Several local workers involved in early subsurface surveys died in unrecorded accidents during exploratory work decades ago. Their names never entered the academic record. Their contribution ended beneath the plateau they helped map. The data they helped uncover remains unpublished. What remains visible is the inheritance. Dynastic Egyptians spoke openly of a time before them, an age of gods who ruled the land, who measured the earth, who established order after chaos. These accounts are treated as mythology, but myth often preserves memory when records fail. If the Nile Valley flooded catastrophically at the end of the Ice Age, it would have wiped out low-lying settlements and forced survivors to rebuild on higher ground, on stone that already stood. Egypt may not be a beginning. It may be a reconstruction. And reconstructions always hide what they were built upon. Excavation restrictions expanded around Giza subsurface zones. 1998. Story 8. The Sunken Cities of Campeche, Mexico. The eighth civilization surfaced by accident in the Gulf of Mexico, off the coast of Campeche. Routine surveys for energy exploration began returning anomalies no one expected to see. Not scattered debris, not shipwrecks, grids, long, straight features arranged in repeating patterns beneath shallow coastal waters. Urban patterns. The grid was deliberate. The scale was wrong. The sea concealed it. When independent researchers gained limited access to the data, the shapes sharpened. Causeways stretching for hundreds of meters. Platform-like elevations. Right angles that refused natural explanation. The formation sat beneath sediment layers consistent with rapid marine flooding, not slow transgression. The timing mattered. Sea level models placed the submergence of this coastline during the chaotic meltwater pulses at the end of the last ice age. The same window already flagged at Dvarka. The same window hinted at beneath Gunung Padang. Different ocean. Same signature. Then came the comparison. Sediment cores extracted near the Campeche structures revealed a distinct high-energy deposit, chaotic, compacted, and abrupt. Internally, it was logged under a neutral designation. But when its grain size distribution and composition were analyzed, it matched something already in the archive. Layer D2. The layers matched. The oceans agreed. The archive remembered. The breadcrumb closed. The same flooding profile identified above engineered stone at Dvarka appeared again beneath the Gulf of Mexico. Two hemispheres. Two cultures. One hydrological event. This was no longer regional disaster. It was synchronization. Who recorded this? Not archaeologists. Corporate survey teams using high-resolution sonar and sub-bottom profilers. Their mandate was resource mapping, not history. But the data did not care. Once the correlation was flagged, access tightened. Further surveys were postponed. The research vessel was reassigned. Requests to release raw sonar files were denied under proprietary clauses. No follow-up coring was authorized at the most anomalous coordinates. The formations remained classified as non-actionable features. This was suppression by ownership. No public refutation. No academic debate. Just silence enforced by contract. The consequence landed on the individuals pushing hardest. A small research group attempting to cross-compare Dvarka's Layer D2 with Campeche's sediment profile lost its funding within months. Their lead analyst left academia altogether. He sold his home to cover legal costs tied to data access disputes. He never published a full comparison. But the implication could not be unseen. If Campeche hosted urban-scale construction before submergence, then advanced coastal societies existed in the Americas far earlier than allowed. And if those societies were drowned in the same event as sites in India and Southeast Asia, then the flood was not cultural memory. It was geological reality. The cadence accelerated. Dvarka drowned. Doggerland erased. Yonaguni submerged. Campeche buried. Different seas. Same water. This was the point of no return. The pattern no longer suggested coincidence. It indicated a single, global disruption that reset coastlines everywhere at once, taking entire civilizations with it. And if that flood was real, then the next question was unavoidable. What could move that much water? Layer D. 2 correlation confirmed across hemispheres. Survey suspended. 2013. Story 9. The Antarctic Ice Structures. The ninth civilization was never meant to be seen. It appeared not in ruins, but in radar returns. In Antarctica, ice-penetrating radar surveys, conducted for climate modeling and subglacial mapping, began producing anomalies beneath the ice sheet. Not random noise, not bedrock chaos, geometric reflections, flat planes, angular intersections, heat signatures where none should exist. The ice was transparent. The shapes were geometric. The signal repeated. At depths exceeding a mile, researchers identified formations that behave like structured surfaces under analysis. The reflections were too consistent. The boundaries too clean. In some areas, meltwater channels traced right angles before vanishing beneath deeper ice, as if flowing around something solid. The location mattered. These anomalies sit in regions believed to have been ice-free in the distant past, before Antarctica froze over completely. Geological evidence confirms that millions of years ago, and possibly much more recently, the continent supported rivers, forests, and exposed land. If construction occurred there, it would have required a temperate window long closed. The land was once open. The freeze came later. Time ran out. Who recorded this? Government-funded scientific teams using standard instrumentation. Nothing experimental. Nothing fringe. The data was processed, logged, and flagged for review. And then it stopped. Access was restricted. The anomalies were reclassified as subglacial features of unknown origin. Further passes were delayed. High-resolution scans were withheld. Independent verification requests were denied on national security and treaty grounds. Antarctica, by design, is a sealed archive. This was suppression by jurisdiction. No one needed to disprove the structures. They only needed to ensure no one could approach them. The cadence tightened when the data was compared. One internal memo, never published, but cited in secondary correspondence, noted that sediment signatures inferred from radar attenuation near the structures aligned with rapid inundation models. The same type used to interpret catastrophic flooding elsewhere. The same flood logic. The same abrupt transition. Layer D, 2 have been identified in India. Matched in Mexico. Implied again beneath the ice. The signal aligned. The archive echoed. The flood returned. The implication was destabilizing. If Antarctica hosted construction before freezing, then the flood was not merely coastal. It was planetary. Sea levels rose. Climate shifted violently. Regions once habitable became uninhabitable in geological moments. This was not a disaster humans adapted to. It was one they fled or didn't survive. The consequence was personal. One polar researcher who attempted to publish an independent analysis of the geometric radar returns was barred from future Antarctic missions. His access credentials were revoked without formal explanation. He lost his career track overnight. He never returned south. His final paper remains unpublished. Antarctica stayed silent. No excavation, No drilling. No descent through the ice. Just signals, trapped beneath a frozen lid that arrived after flood, preserving whatever lies below in permanent suspension. At this point, the pattern was undeniable. Flood signatures across oceans. Urban geometry beneath seas. Now structure beneath ice. The cadence accelerated because the margin for coincidence vanished. If the flood reached Antarctica, then it was not regional. It was not cultural. It was not symbolic. It was global, and it left no refuge. Subglacial anomalies reclassified, access restricted under treaty provisions. 2016. Story 10. The Black Sea Deluge Event. The 10 civilization is where the pattern locks. Unlike the others, this one is not speculative. It is measured, dated, accepted within limits. Around 5600 BC, the Black Sea was not a sea at all. It was a freshwater lake, bordered by fertile plains and human settlements. Then something irreversible happened. The Mediterranean breached the Bosporus. Salt water poured in with catastrophic force, raising water levels by hundreds of feet in a short span of time. Entire coastlines vanished. The barrier failed. The water surged. The land was erased. Marine cores taken from the Black Sea floor show a sharp transition. Freshwater sediments abruptly capped by marine deposits. Shell species change instantly. Shorelines retreat miles inland. This was not gradual seepage. It was a flood that advanced faster than communities could escape. Who recorded this? Oceanographers, geologists, and paleoclimatologists. The evidence is strong enough that the event is now taught carefully as a major environmental shift. But the human dimension is minimized because what was lost was not empty land. Submerged river valleys, terraces, and possible habitation zones line the Black Sea's drowned margins. Sonar surveys reveal shapes that resemble foundations and alignments, quickly dismissed as natural formations or later debris. No systematic underwater archaeology program was ever authorized to investigate them fully. This was suppression by framing. The deluge is acknowledged. Its consequences are narrowed. The timeline is the key. The Black Sea flood aligns with a cascade of meltwater pulses at the end of the Ice Age. The same window implicated at Dvarka, at Yonaguni, at Doggerland, at Campeche. The same hydrological violence inferred beneath Antarctica's ice. The dates converged. The seas connected. The system collapsed. This is a hinge. If the Black Sea deluge displaced thousands, possibly millions, of people in a single event, then mass migration followed. Survivors would have carried fragmented knowledge into new regions, seeding later cultures with stories of a world destroyed by water. This is where myth begins. Not as fiction, but as memory under pressure. The consequence was total. Communities along the Black Sea had no higher ground nearby. Their world ended in months, not centuries. Fields drowned. Rivers reversed. Trade routes vanished. An entire Neolithic network collapsed and dispersed. One submerged settlement, briefly surveyed before funding ended, contained stone tools abandoned mid-use. No graves. No rebuilding. Just absence. Whoever lived there left in panic, or did not leave at all. The Black Sea flood does not stand alone. It synchronizes a record. 10 sites. 10 collapses. 1 global disruption. This was not the end of civilization. It was the end of civilization. And when the waters finally stopped rising, the survivors rebuilt on higher ground, told stories to remember what they could, and were later told those stories were only myths. The flood did not erase history. It reordered it. And that reordering still governs what we are allowed to believe. Timeline convergence established. Multi-site flood alignment acknowledged. 2009.